All right, so I'm going to jump around just a little bit. And so I'm skipping 5.1 on purpose, and I'm going to look then at 5.4. That seems like an odd jump, but bear with me here. Launch Cengage. Launch. Okay. So there's some other concepts that we're going to start introducing in this. Oh, I guess I need to go backwards. Never mind. Let me go backwards. Maybe it does make sense to do 5.3 first. Okay. So 5.3 is a program that we use that we're going to modify something that's actually in our book. And since we're going to do it a couple of times, we need to kind of look at a couple of items that are inside of here. All right. So, if you've read through the book, we're going to use a program, and it's going to create sentences. And part of the ways it's going to do that is we've broken our speech up into a list of different pieces. So we have articles, and we have nouns, and we have prepositions, and we have verbs. So we can add to this list, but right now we've broken it up into chunks. And so we're going to create a program that's going to take those and it's going to create a sentence. So this is what we should look like when we're done. So enter the number of sentences. Let's say 4. Oh, hang on. I'll change my do this a little bit. Edit. And I need to add my blank input at the end. All right. Otherwise, it's not going to. All right. Let me try that again. Number of sentences 4. A boy liked a girl by a boy. So it's generating a sentence. Do they make any sense? No. But what we're creating is a sentence structure based on a predefined set of rules. So certainly if we expanded the number of items in there, so if we had more articles, if we had more nouns, and we can certainly add those to our program to try that. So that's what it's going to generate. So we're going to get a little bit of some of this already from our book. So we're going to modify this right here. So a couple of things it's going to do to start with. So it's going to input a function called random. And we're going to introduce you to something called the functions first. So first it's going to import random, and then we're going to go in and put these articles in. Nouns. Now notice those are the same as what we have up here. So we're going to change that a little bit. So step part 1 is, when we get through here, we're going to write a function called getWords. Well, we haven't built a function yet, but we're going to right now. So we're going to replace this with a function. And because we already have some of those in here so you can see them, what do you think the first thing we're going to type to start a function is? Define. DEF defines a function. DEF, define a function. And we're going to create one called getWords. And so now, later on, when we reference that phrase getWords, it does a couple of things. And we're going to take in something called a file name. We're going to call this variable file name because that's what we're going to create, is a file that we've started someplace else in here, and we're going to point it to it. All right. We don't necessarily at this point know what all we need in here, but I know that we're going to have to get these articles, the nouns, the prepositions, and the verbs. Got it. So, just like we did before, but now we're building it into a reusable function, we're going to have input file equals open and file name. Now what I don't have, and again I'm going to open these as a read only, we're not going to change them, and I'm going to put them into words. And again, I'm telling Python that we're creating a list of items. Now, I'm going to create our loop to cycle all the way through those again. So for line in input file. So again, we're going to scroll through all of those. We're going to say words dot extend. So we're going to use a slightly different thing than we've done before, line dot split. So we're going to use the line split to pull apart the words, and we're going to do that inside of. So we actually have two methods in one piece. All right. So do I have both of those? Okay, so 1, 2, 3. All right. So the only thing different than what we haven't done before is we're going to do this, and we're going to return something. So back to our main program, we're going to return some kind of value. So we get in a file name, and we're going to return then this value here we called words. So we're going to return a tuple words. Now, the reason we're using a tuple is because we don't want to change that, and we're not going to necessarily need to change that. So, before we had just we essentially said articles equals, and then we actually had a list of them we used. Now we're going to call this function get words, and what we're going to pass into it here is the name of that file, articles.txt. Well, we're going to do the same thing with our nouns. So instead of having to write each one of these separately, now we're reusing this function up here. So nouns.txt. Then we have verbs equals get words. And finally, prepositions. Prepositions.txt. All right. So now, what it's going to do is go out to each one of those. So if I wanted a list of articles, because right now we only have a couple of. So a, an, and the typically are ones. A, we didn't include an, but we also don't have rules built in that we can tell the difference between a and other thing. We could also certainly put in some more. So ball, player, shortstop. So we could put in all different kinds of items in there. And I'm going to try to print those here real quick. So I want to print, just so I can see if I do actually, so I want to print articles, nouns, verbs, prepositions. And I'm going to print those out. So I'm going to run this to see if we successfully change this just a little bit. And the reason we do that, it gets kind of awkward if we had a long amount of these. Now we can change that file independent of the program itself. So I could write this part, and I could have my editor creating prepositions and verbs and text, and it's going to run no matter what's in this. So let's run this. Line 14, invalid syntax. All right, what have I done? Now we'll try it again. All right, now let's see what the errors are that we get. All right, so trace back line 17. Articles equals get words, and what is it telling me about that? Art.txt. Line 15, what have I done there? Error words is not defined. So I do have a little cleanup to do there. So where did I do that? Print articles, nouns. So let me come up here and take a look at this and make sure that I didn't do anything really weird and that it's just a simple typo, which hopefully it is. Prepositions. And this is where that we're looking through there gets hard. Oh, hey. I suppose since I'm going to call it get words and words, let me make that similar. Words dot. Okay. So silly typo of my part here, hopefully. Prepositional. Yes, probably I did. Oh. If I didn't type and make silly mistakes, let's see here. Did I mean prepositions? Yes. Yes, I did. And so now, it actually went through here, and it actually printed out all of my different items. Great. So, it's pulling them from the different files. Let me make sure my prepositions, my verbs, so those are all there. So now I can move on to see what the other changes are we need to make to this program. There it is. Okay. So, open an input file, define a temporary list, read words to file, add them to my list. Convert the list to a tuple, and return that tuple. So I created my first function here. So as this program starts, each time I reference that get words, it passes in a file name and it extends that into the tuple. Perfect. So now the rest of that program should work very similarly. So notice what that program is, however, is a set of functions. So in this case, sentence doesn't take anything in, but it returns a noun phrase. Define noun phrase. So build and returns a noun phrase at a random choice. Verb phrase, prepositional phrase. And then way down here, we actually define our main function. So the main program we're going to run is here. So up there in our header, we pulled in that information. But what's interesting is even our main function is now defined as a smaller function here. And so the key to that is this sentence right here. So, this is one we just generically use. So, essentially, if we want to run the main program, it's called main, this fires it off right here. So this fires off and calls main and says, all right, now we're going to input the number of sentences, and then that creates a loop and calls the rest of our functions. So over here, if we want to see that, so when that actually runs through there, now it runs from one function to another. The only thing in our main program is this line right here. That's it. And that's kind of crazy, but what that lets us do is once I've created a function, I don't need to worry about it anymore. So I can offset. So sentences builds a sentence, so what it does is actually goes out and runs noun phrase and verb phrase and puts them together. So I'm calling a function from a function from a function. But it allows me to be abstract in that I don't need to remember all the details. I can remember kind of the abstract functioning here. So enter the number of sentences, and it will put those together. And it does that. The player hit a ball by a girl, blah, 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 blah. So a shortstop saw a shortstop with the boy. So they may not make much sense, but they're grammatically okay, which is interesting that we can do that. All right. So we have a hint here, and that's one of the things that they've started to introduce us to is that ability to come in and do this ability to do that hint function. So now we've built a first function. We haven't talked a lot about it yet. We looked at some of the other pieces. All right. So this is a function. Get words, input lines. Anything we do repetitively, a function makes a lot of sense. Why have to go through and build that every single time? All right, so we're going to take a look at 5.4 really quickly. And see if we can change that a little bit. All right, so let's go back. Go to here. Okay, so in this one, we're taking a file again that we've already generated and created. And so this is that same program we just created that function for, but we don't need it in this case. We're not going to modify how it takes in data. What we're going to modify is how it generates sentences. And so one of the things we're going to do is we're going to change a couple of things. So when we say optional, that means it's going to include elements in some kind of random order. So our changes are the prepositional phrase is optional, a conjunction and a second independent clause are optional, and the adjective is optional. All right. So let's do number 1 to start with and look and see if we can figure out how we can make a prepositional phrase optional. All right. Let's look at this and how does it build a sentence. So maybe we need to think about that a little bit. So define sentence. So the sentence says we're going to return a noun phrase and we're going to return a verb phrase. And we want to add the ability to have an independent clause. So, the prepositional phrase here builds and returns a prepositional phrase. So, we have to figure out where we're calling that from. From our verb phrase. So it says random choice verbs, noun phrase, and then it calls a prepositional phrase. So, sometimes it helps to draw out that order of how we're doing this. So, this line calls our main. The main says how many sentences are you going to run, and then it prints sentence. Sentence gets passed up here, and it says I'm gonna go get a noun phrase and a verb phrase. So noun phrase, random choice article plus random choice noun. Our verb phrase, though, is where we have the piece where it says return a random choice verb and a noun phrase and a prepositional phrase. So, we have to figure out kind of our order first. All right. So where I think we could start with this is actually then in our sentence. And I'm going to come up here and add a little bit here to clauses, conjunctions, and prepositional phrases randomly. Alright, so what I think we're going to have to change when I start thinking about that is, how do I find that verb phrase, which is where we get this prepositional phrase. So I think what we really need to modify then is our verb phrase to deal with the prepositions. So it says return random choice verbs. So in other words, it picks a verb at random, plus noun phrase. So then it goes down and calls the noun phrase function, and then the prepositional phrase. So, I'm going to try to modify this piece here. So, returns a verb phrase, prepositional optional. So somehow we're going to have to change this so it doesn't always return the entire thing. So, easy way to do that, or one way to do that. Come back in here. So, we need to define a random number. So, maybe we do this, well, let's think of a couple different ways to do it. I can do a random number, so random equals, let's do, because I can't use random, so chance equals random dot, let's do integers, and I could put in, let's do 1, 10. So that's going to set a random integer between 1 and 10. How much of a chance do most sentences have to have prepositions? So as a percentage, maybe we find a percentage that says that's what we like. Maybe we could do it easier. We could say 1, 2. That's only going to generate 2 responses. And so if we think 50% of our sentences should have prepositions, then that might be an easy way to do that. So we've created a random number between 1 and 2. So we could do something like an if chance equals, let's do 1. Then, let's see, what do we call it in the prep phrase, ring phrase. So if that is true, let's do this. Let's do prep phrase. So just to get a space in there, and we're going to call prepositional phrase. There it is. So if it's 1, it's going to flip down here and build a prepositional phrase. Else, that prep phrase is going to stay blank. Returned random choice verbs plus noun plays. And instead of prepositional phrase, we're going to take this piece out and replace it with our... So now, whether it calls this prepositional phrase or not, so now it's random in some weird sense. It's either 50%. We could do it other ways. So if we thought that prepositional phrases should be less than 50%, we could simply do it like this. So maybe we went to 1 to 4. So now there's 4 choices. Come back here. There it is. All right. So now we go 1 to 4, but only if it's 1 or 2 or 3. You could pick any of the numbers, and that would give you about a 25% chance that it would do that. If we went 1 to 10, and you just picked any number in there, it's about a 10% chance. So that's how we can start this with our prepositional phrase and try to narrow that down. There are lots of other ways to do that. I could have built that into here in the prepositional phrase also, so where rather than run all the time and return anything, it did that random here. And it might make some sense to do that here also. I don't know. So this is just a quick way that we could do that and build it. There's a lot of other ways to do that. So that's step 1. A conjunction and second independent clause are optional. So that one's going to be a little tougher. We will start on that on Thursday. This chapter you need to read and work along with to understand some of these. We're going to build functions. We're now building these ideas of list items or tuples or dictionary items, which we haven't touched yet. So there's a lot of new concepts to make this very usable for us coming up. All right, so we'll finish up 5.4. We'll show you how we could do a second independent clause, and maybe we'll then do this adjective. All right.